Hey everyone, how are we all doing? Yes, it's that time again, Sunday 4 p.m. standard. We're gonna be going live with Kudzi Talk Show. I'm Kudzi Talk Show. It's your girl, Kudzi. And I'm so excited just to have a part 2 of what we were discussing last week. For those that tuned in, we had a wonderful discussion with Benjamin Hamandishe, Dr. Mercy Nyawanza, and Pastor Sam, where we were just discussing and trying to figure out why the second generation were leaving African diaspora churches for Western churches. Yes, we were looking and digging into, the reasons why and, pointing them out and addressing them. However, did we really come up with solutions? But guess what? That's what we're doing today. I've gathered a phenomenal panel today to come and discuss and talk to us and just help us find some solutions as to exactly how we can sort this dilemma that is going on, not just in African diaspora churches, but many churches across the world. So let me just bring up my first panelist. We have got the wonderful Reverend Mishek Manana. Would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Kudzi. My name is Mishek, and my wife and I lead a church here in Southampton. It's a great honor to be able to contribute towards this very great discussion and conversation. So yeah, really pleased to be here.
That's great. Thank you so much. We're excited to have you. I'm ready. I'm so excited. I hope you guys are too. That's awesome. Next, I have got the wonderful Reverend Charity with us. If she could just please pop her camera on so she could just introduce herself to you guys.
Well, Kudzi, thank you for the privilege to be part of this conversation. My name is Reverend Charity Nzegu, and I am Methodist minister in the Cambridge Circuit.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Reverend. It's an honor to have you on this platform. And my last panelist, but definitely not least, we have got the wonderful Auntie Mimi. Please introduce yourself. Oh, unfortunately, I cannot hear you, Auntie.
Hello everyone. Hi. It's me, Mimi. Hello, I'm an author. I am a mother. I'm a pediatric nurse. I am an agony auntie. I am a church elder. Yes, I'm a church elder, and I gave my life to Christ when I was just a teenager, and I've been walking the walk since I was about 13.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I believe you've all heard them loud and clear. Please, in the comments, if you do struggle with audio, if you hear that we're cracking up, please let me know as soon as possible. We want to make sure that we get everything clear as possible. So thanks so much. This is my wonderful panel, people. This is just going to be a disclaimer before we get into what we really gathered here for. Just to put this out there and just to on the onset, this is going to be just my panel giving their personal opinions, experiences, and representing denominational theological positions that they hold on the subject matter. This is nothing that we should take out of context, but rather this is just them expressing what they feel and answering the question that I have asked, as well as you guys. So please keep that in mind. I will repeat this to prevent any sort of confusion, but this is going to be just their personal experiences and opinions and etc. theological positions. So let's get into it. The question that we are asking today is there any hope of, finding the cultural and missional bridge between the first and second generation? This is just going to be one question, but it branches off loads. So, I'm going to read out the areas of focus that were, mentioned last week, and then we're going to go straight into it. Things that we will be mentioning are solutions to cultural imbalances, theological differences, use of African language or vernacular languages in work services, and upholding ministerial experiences and God's anointing for service over theological training, and African traditions and viewpoints, and narrowing the generational gap. So let's just get straight into it. I would love if we get our wonderful Pastor Mishek to just kick us off. Tell us what you're thinking, sir.
Well, there's always hope. There will always be hope. We can never lose sight of that. I think we have already come a long way in terms of this bridge that we need, well, that needs to be built between the first and second generation. I came to the UK when I was the age of 15, so I would probably be in that second generation-ish. I mean, just about. And I think I really truly believe there is definitely hope, but I think there's work to be done on both, from both generations. I think with the first generation, one of the things that I've always said before, even in all the different discussions and conversations with other leaders from the BAME community, is this whole thing about the foundations of churches and why churches were built. I mean, even the children of Israel went through the same thing when they went into exile. They had to carry some sort of figure that would represent what they believed back in their homeland. But again, that did not always really reflect the nature or the DNA of the new context that they found themselves in. Now, that's not to say it's a bad thing. So, for example, I'm second generation pastor in my family. My parents were first generation pastors, and the way they would do church would be very different to the way I would do church. Not to say one way is better than the other, but I think the context of generation is very, very important. I think it would be very remiss to expect the first generation to do church in a way that the second generation understands, because they don't understand that, nor will the second generation fully appreciate the dynamics of church within the mindset of the first generation. Now, how do we bring the two together? I think the only way we can do it is the way that everyone else is doing it at the moment, which is to find a hybrid model. We've got to find a hybrid model that has both great strengths from the first generation and great strengths from the second generation, and bring them together to try and find a way of bringing this bridge. Can we undo the foundations of how the churches have been built over the last 20 to 30 years? Probably not, because then you will isolate and you will neglect the first generation, because that is what they have understood as being church. And it's not wrong, but it's relevant to their generation. And now I think that's where the conversation then comes back to the point where we now say, how do we bring this hybrid of both the first generation and the second generation? And I think one of the things I love about the strengths between the two is that whether we like it or not, the first generations their spiritual IQ is far higher and far greater than the second generation. And I think we have to find a way of tapping into that spiritual IQ and then bringing the digital IQ of the second generation, and then looking at how we bring that together, build a church based on those key foundations from both the first generation and the second generation. And I believe we can develop that, and I believe that can truly be achieved. So we'll start from there. So I think that there is definitely hope, and I think there is need to pull up the positives from the first generation and the second generation, and then see if we can make a hybrid model.
That's awesome. Thank you. I've got a question that I'm going to ask, but before I ask that, I'm going to get Reverend Charity. Please, can you give us what you're thinking, madam?
It's lovely to hear Mishek speak. I always think, as long as we have young people and as long as we have older people, there's always hope.
Yeah.
And I think that the real struggle is when we have this binary understanding of first generation and second generation, which makes it really look like both of them in some way are homogeneous. The real challenge is that they are not. So within the first generation, there are variations that we may need to understand, but there are also variations within the first generation. And I think that our hope is that we are able to have the conversations that we are actually having now. And I think that's the first step. And I think going forward, it might just really be useful to spend time understanding the actual makeup of these generations and finding ways in which we can create within our churches safe spaces for both the first generation and the second generation for conversation, for them to be themselves, for them to bring to the discussion table who they are and what they have, both of them. And then perhaps that way we may be able to find a way in which we can understand the intergenerational congregations that are probably called for our time, recognizing that our young people as well as ourselves are actually exercising ministry in a very complex context. And now, when you actually bring in the issues around Black Lives Matter and all the other things that young people are having to struggle with, as well as the adaptations that the second generation have to make. So the easier thing is to find the quick fixes. The real work where we will both encounter Christ is in the attitudinal, cultural, and some of our systems, how we change that to create this space that enables conversations that are useful to both.
Thank you. That was extremely enlightening. And of course, Auntie Mimi, that's what I call you. Please give us what you're thinking.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you to the previous speakers. And I want to commend you, Kudzi, for taking this initiative to ask these questions. I think our hope begins here when young people actually come to us and say, you know what, there is a problem here. What can we do? And I'm thinking last week was phenomenal because we had the young people and the older people, older generation coming together, talking. And Pastor Reverend Charity talked about safe spaces. So I'm thinking maybe away from our services, we might need to have time where we are conversing with the younger generation, and we are putting the younger generation in the forefront so that they can do peer-to-peer networking and bring those that have gone back to our heritage, because there are some things that are just pertinent to us, that are relevant to us. And our hope is in you young people who have not left to bring back the other ones. But we, the older generation, need to sit down now and think, what do we need to do? Have conversations amongst ourselves and resolve the problems that we are having. Some of our problems are starting in the home environment, where we do not have relationships with our children. Maybe because we are working and we are on a Sunday, is our off day, and that is the only time we're saying to our children, get ready, let's go to church, because we are working all the time. So now we need to have these conversations. We need to have plans in place to win our children in the home environment first. Then we come to the church environment.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very good intro to our discussion today. I've got a personal question, if that's okay. Ask Pastor Mishi. You mentioned how the second generation have a higher spiritual IQ. Could you elaborate on that, please?
I knew you were going to bring that up. I think there is an awareness, both from a traditional perspective, particularly in the first generation. So even when you look at the fact that outside of a church context, you would have almost like a natural understanding of spiritual matters that the first generation were exposed to from very, very young ages, albeit in some cases it could be occultic, some cases it could be something that is not quite kosher in light of Christendom, but an awareness of spirituality was very, very high and is very high within the context of the first generation, whereas in the second generation, I would argue it probably isn't as high. I think there was a spiritual, this is what I said, there's a spiritual IQ in the first generation that would be very, very helpful when combined with the second generation's digital IQ, because you need both. The direction in which church is going right now, or even our understanding of church, it's inevitable that the digital side of things is getting stronger and stronger. But you can't just have a digital church without the strong spiritual IQ, because without the spirituality, where is the church? Spirituality is a crucial part of the church, and that's where I'm coming from with regards to digital IQ. I think the first generation has got a vast exposure to spiritual stuff more than the second generation.
Thank you for elaborating. However, we're getting a few comments regarding sound. I don't know whether we should mute ourselves and once talking, or we should refresh our audio. But sound apparently is cracking up and we've got a bit of feedback. So I would advise that when we're trying to talk when one's talking, that we mute ourselves, if that's okay. Can you hear me clearly now? I heard there's feedback on my side. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, that's great. Thank you. It was quite a controversial statement that you said. I can't lie. It made me think twice. I was like, oh, okay, you saying I got a high IQ? Hallelujah, hallelujah. Yeah. But I understood what you're saying. Let's go into one of our kind of subcategories, which is African languages in worship services or vernacular languages. So if Auntie Mimi, could you just shed a bit more light on exactly either your experience or what your take is on using African languages in worship services, where there is the second generation also in the room who might not have had or might not understand completely the language?
Yeah, I think the language is that sometimes we are using, for me, we use Shona language in our services. Sometimes when you get a preacher is speaking and they want to elaborate on something, they automatically revert to Shona. This is something that happens. Most of the services that I've come across, they are trying to be in English services. However, our culture, maybe societal culture, will filter into our services. There are things that we just do that is just culturally right to us. It makes us think back of home. It brings us together. But sometimes we forget that our children are not understanding. I have got an 18-year-old and a 12-year-old. And when we get home, sometimes they're asking me questions. What did that mean? What did that mean? So I became more conscious that some of the things I am saying, they are not understanding. Then obviously after church with my colleagues, when we meet each other, we speak in Shona, because I speak Shona. So we speak in Shona. How are you? How are things? We clap our hands, we do those things. And we forget that some of our children, one, they do not understand. And we go and we talk to our children who are not understanding us, and we are just commanding instructions to them. There are words that we use in Shona that when we use them in English, they don't make sense. Like this morning, I wanted to say to my child, your behavior is getting out of hand. And in Shona, it says you are getting warm. If you transfer it to Shona, it's like you are getting warm. You will get cold very soon. This is how then you say it in Shona, isn't it? So those things, sometimes we are talking to our children in those languages that they do not understand. And I think because you are saying this conversation, you are making us aware and we are thinking about it. And I think in my church and Forward in Faith Ministries International, it's something that we begin to address. We're starting to talk about it. Sometimes we remind each other in our services, remember to speak in English. But I think it will take us a long time because we do enjoy speaking in this Shona language.
Thank you. That was very good. I've just received a comment asking what the topic is. I'm just going to repeat the topic. We're basically discussing and trying to see if there's any hope of finding a cultural and missional bridge between the first and second generation. Auntie Mimi has just expanded a bit on one of our sub topics, which is African vernacular languages in worship services. So that's our topic. I'll pop it on the screen for you, and then we'll continue. So yes, Reverend Charity, could you please talk a little bit about African vernacular languages in services?
So I quite liked the idea that we like speaking in our vernacular, because some of those things we are unable to express them in any other language. However, for me, the starting point is always going to be, who are we and what are we trying to do? And sometimes I think that within the church, we have had an overemphasis on our national and cultural identity. More than that, we have had our emphasis on our identity in Christ and what that means. And I'm always driven by the fact that we are all called to make disciples of all nations. And I find that really challenging. It therefore means that I have to think very carefully, if we are going to make disciples of all nations, what does that mean? What would that take? And so, yes, it's okay to have spaces where we can speak in our own languages, and we can share and fellowship together. But if we are really going to deliver the commission, we need to do a little bit more, I think. And I think we are able to do so if we are looking for jobs. If we are looking for our naturalization, we have to learn things and we have to sit an exam. And I think that it's context for me is the key driver. Unless you understand your context, it's always going to be difficult to share the gospel in a way that is meaningful to the inhabitants of that context. So I am always challenged what the best thing to do is. If I'm among just Zimbabweans and Shona speaking people, that's okay. But sometimes I also have Ndebele speaking people, and I don't speak Ndebele. Oh my goodness, I want to share the gospel with Ndebele speaking people, and I'm an adult. And I imagine what that feels like for a young person. So I am at that place where we need to identify what it is we want to achieve, what we need to achieve that, and how we resource that. So that we are also able to speak some of the languages that are spoken in Zimbabwe to start off with, if we are to feed other Zimbabweans as well, let alone making disciples of other nations. So I'm challenged by our identity and what it is we are called to do together.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you so much. That was, again, very enlightening. Of course, we go to Pastor Mishek.
Well, I think that the way the speakers have just outlined it and explained and unpacked it a bit more is really, really enlightening. I have to say, when it comes to the vernacular issue, I think that's the smallest of the problems that we actually have. I mean, think about it. When around the late 90s to early 2000s, where there was a mass migration from Zimbabwe into the UK, there was a huge adaptation period where people left high-profile jobs in Zimbabwe, and they came in, they started from cleaning, they started from warehouse work, they were doing all of those kind of menial jobs, and they were willing to adapt in all of those things. We even changed our diet. We had to change food, we had to change language, we had to change jobs, we had to change lifestyles. So changing is not the issue here. We can change. I have to be very, very, in some sense, blunt and say, I think when it comes to the church, we're a bit reluctant to adapt to this, when it comes to the vernacular language. I don't think it's a problem. I just think it's a choice. I really, truly believe it's a choice, because we have already adapted. No one speaks in Shona when they're at work. You adapt to the environment that you're in. If the church's mission, like Rev Charity said, the church's mission is to raise disciples. If the only disciples that you see in your church look like you, then you're not fulfilling the full mission. You're fulfilling part of the mission. And I think that is part and parcel of a big problem that we have. So I don't think the vernacular language issue is a big issue at all. We have already been adapting, and we have adapted for many, many years.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know what? I agree with all of you. to some degree, because I can't lie. As, of course, born in the UK, first time I went to Zimbabwe, I was 13 years old, and I went for 2 weeks. Okay. But growing up, I picked up Shona very quickly.
Yeah.
I'll just say this. I'm of course we're gonna move on to our next, but I will just say I picked up because I was surrounded by my parents who spoke Shona all the time. I went to a church where it was 110%. Everyone spoke Shona. During service, it was hymns. After service, they were sending me and telling me to do stuff in Shona. So I just picked up the language. However, some of my friends were not fortunate enough like that. Some of them went to churches that were mixed, so they don't even know. Some of them, their parents didn't speak it to them. And then now when they're growing up, they're finding it quite embarrassing that they don't know how to speak the language. And it's becoming something that causes them to also push towards the British people and that culture, because they feel like they fit in better. Do you know what I mean? I'm only saying this from the perspective of my generation and what my friends around me have done. So when it's saying that it is not a major problem, but is one of the less problems, should I say. But of course, it's something where it all comes around down to background, growing up, nature, nurture, all of that. So thank you so much for shedding light on African vernacular languages and worship services. And I think if I'm just to ask this before we move on, it can be either any one of you who could answer this. What would you say in short words the solution to that would be? Because for some it's a big issue about these hymns in the church. In my personal experience, my church is making a very conscious effort to understand that there are other cultures and there are other nationalities, in our church. Therefore, we cannot, just because we're predominantly Shona, we cannot just be singing Shona songs. And there are young people that do not understand it. Therefore, let's not do that. So what would you say is in very, very brief, before we move on, would be a solution that you would say could help us sort this problem?
I personally have to say the solution is very simple. We have got to have a conviction about the mission that Jesus Christ left us. If we really have a conviction about that, then all of these things are not going to be issues at all. I am a church leader in a church that is predominantly white. Never at any point do I have any issue about, I really feel the itch of speaking in Shona. That's not important to me. What's important is the salvation of the people who are in front of me, from all nations, Asian, Chinese, Indian, white English, all of those people. That is more important to me than the tickle of speaking in Shona.
Perhaps for those who will speak Shona, maybe to have translation services in your services, have someone translating, have like if it's a song, have it on projectors, explain what a song means, because some people come to your church to learn about other cultures. So explain so that people don't feel left out, so that they understand. So if it's just like the full good songs, maybe you can try and then explain them. But if you're doing deep worship, maybe do something that everyone understands so that everyone can worship together. But you will not be in a service and have all the people in that service understanding English. Some people won't be understanding English. So you just have to find the middle ground and try and accommodate everyone.
So I'll add just a little bit to what both Bishek and Mimi have said. I think it's always easy to think that everybody hears. And sometimes we have people in our congregations who do not hear and probably who do not see. So for me, what you're talking about is also, it's the communication in its totality. So to remember that we have got people who need some support with their hearing, they need support with their reading. So understand the makeup of our congregations and the communities within which we are drawing our membership, so that if somebody comes there and they can't hear completely, we are able to get somebody who can do the sign language thing. And I want us to be considering all those things because they're significant. If there are people who cannot read because we've projected and it's up there and they've got neck problems already, let's think about them. If we are printing stuff, let's make sure the colors don't cause problems to other people. Let's just be intentional in what we want to achieve. It doesn't matter to me what we have to do. What matters to me is that we understand the makeup of who we are journeying with towards the end, which is the making of more disciples.
Awesome. So if I'm to, as a second generation, I'm going to sum up what you've just said. It's all about conviction and consideration. Is that all right? Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, our next subcategory, which is, I'm going to ask you a question saying, how do we strike a balance between the preservation and maintenance of African cultures and values? Because the first generation seem to be holding on to, you know, what they grew up on, what they were taught, and they do not want to change it for nothing, and they refuse to let the Western dilute what they've been taught. So I stand firm, I know who I am. And then there's the second generation that is like, you're a bit rigid, I can't lie, they're a bit strict, I'm not really feeling this, I'm going to go somewhere that's a bit more relaxed. But of course I understand where they're coming from, but let me not talk, please. Reverend Charity.
I have a lot of sympathy for the second generation. Somehow I want to agree with Mishek just a little bit. I think that the second generation does hold the traditions of the church. They also hold the theologies of the church. They hold the language of the church. However, they have come from a completely different context that has been impacted not only by poverty, but they have lived through colonialism. They have lived through the AIDS and HIV pandemic. They have lived through drought. They have had a really difficult time. They have been forced to do things that they probably didn't want to do when they came over here as refugees. So they are already in a very difficult place. So we want to harvest some of what they already have. I also have a lot of sympathy with the young people who cannot connect with that context and have been born or now live in a very complex context that the second generation also needs to make an effort to understand. And sometimes I get really concerned when some of the second generation friends of mine are really not interested in what happens in the world surrounding them, in which our young people are growing up, in which our young people spend most of their times. There is somehow an understanding of a separation between the world and the church that I think is a false separation. So I think there needs, if possible, to be conversations where second generation folk can get some reverse mentoring from young people so we can understand the life of young people in this context and how difficult it is, and vice versa. So just let's share our lived experiences that have shaped who we are, and the lived experiences of the first generation, which shapes who they are. Somewhere in between there, we will find an enabling Christ who will help us find ways in which we can serve both. So I will always insist once again, it's context and context and more context, and sharing that understanding and how it impacts our faith.
Okay, that's good. Auntie Mimi.
I like two words that we have discussed in this session, deliberate and intentional. If we are really wanting to impart our culture and our traditions in our children in the second generation, we can do activities away from our church services that promote the culture. Then in the church service, we then focus on just worship. So I think that is something we could intentionally do so that we are not losing the culture, because the culture is part of who we are. Although it is evolving, we will never belong anywhere else. We will belong with our history and our journey. Although our children are second generation, they are part of our journey. Then I wanted to touch something that Pastor has said about the intellect of the parents, that they are spiritually, their IQ spiritually is high, and that is so true. We went through a journey where we had to go through aggressive faith to get to where we are now as Christians, whereas our children, they're not experiencing the same challenges we were experiencing, but they are children who are so focused on the digital world. And in the digital world, there are people who are brainwashing our children. So sometimes you find your child is now moving away, but is completely moving away. There's what is called radicalization. Our children are now being radicalized. So although we are spiritually have a high IQ, we need to put structures in place so that we have resources on the digital resources that will attract our children, so that they will have the true gospel that we are preaching in our sessions. It should be available to them in the digital platforms.
Pastor Michelle, that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Rev and Auntie Mimi again, great input and great contribution. See, as a dad of 4, one of my biggest concerns, it's very young family, is that I am probably the last generation to have a good handle of both Shona and English. And that terrifies me when I think of what my children will look like and how they will be able to to develop some sort of identity going forward. And I think a preservation of who we are as a people is absolutely crucial, and it's absolutely important. It's the how part of it that becomes a little bit tricky. So for us, our home is the first church. Our home is where all of these different conversations are explored, who we are. My children ask me all kinds of questions. Why do you do this? And why do you do that? And how do you say this? And how do you say that? We can't achieve that in church. I totally agree with what you're saying, Auntie Mimi, about activities that church activities that celebrate the culture and the heritage. But I think before we get to that part, the first part has got to be in the home. I think because unfortunately the problem is this: in some homes, the conversation around preserving heritage is too backward, and that is a problem. That is another problem. So we can't assume that everyone is keen to preserve the heritage. For some, the heritage was left when the aeroplane took off at Robert Mugabe Airport. And that's when the heritage stayed on the runway, and that was it. They never looked back, and they never wanted anything to do with it. But for me personally, I do want to preserve that. I get terrified at the thought of me being the last generation to have both Shona and English handle before I pass it over to my children. So I am trying, again, coming back to that word hybrid. I'm trying to raise hybrid children who have a good handle of their heritage, but also a good handle of their current context.
Thank you very much. That was very enlightening from all 3 of you. Thank you very much. So, in short, how do we narrow that gap? How do we get it to? How do we try and? Of course, the different worldviews are there from the first and second generation, but how do we kind of bring them together, or at least narrow the gap?
Can I jump in on that first? I think there's a crucial part of realization in the first generation that must come to terms with the fact that the direction in which the world is going at the moment is more natural to the second generation than to the first generation. And I think we just have to accept that. We have to see it for what it is, and then work to our strengths to make sure that those who are now at the forefront of it are doing the best they can. So when we go back to scripture, for example, when it came to the pulling down of significant wall structures, Judah went first, praise went first. That didn't make sense, because you're supposed to have your greatest solid armies first in the front. That's what you would expect. But there is something about the support of the first generation to the second generation going forward, because the second generation is more favored with the direction where the world is going, both in terms of church and society. But they also need the wisdom and foresight and experience of the first generation. You can't do one without the other. I think the greatest collaboration is when the two are working hand in hand. But the key thing is who is in front. And I have to say the one in front has got to be the second generation, backed up strongly by the first generation and everything that they bring.
Any more comments, or should we move on? Yeah.
You see, I think I've got a slightly different take to that, and I'm interested in your suggestion, Ms. Sheikh. However, I also think that for me, if we go back and think about who are we and whose are we will always come back to this whole thing that we are all made in the image of God, first, second, third, or eighth generation. And therefore, the aim for each one of us, irrespective of the generation that we belong to, should aim to become the people or the person who God created us to be. And I think that happens when we together understand that before God, the young and the old bit really is a small problem. What matters is that together we focus on God, and we focus on being the best that God wants us to be. And so I think the second generation has a lot to learn from the first generation, and vice versa. And I always wonder, with all the teachers that we have in our churches, why we still haven't got a school that teaches our children who were born here our language, our culture, for example. Why we can't do that in a way that is sustainable. I am married to a Nigerian man. So when we are home, and I agree with you, for me, my home is my first ministry, my first circuit. And when we are home, we don't speak Igbo, we speak English. And therefore that means our daughter speaks English. Her only encounter with Shona is when she goes home to my mother. And she'll come back, she knows how to say good morning and things like that, but she is not fluent at all. I desire for her to be, and it's difficult for me to do. So I think what we can do is be a bit more creative and use the resource that God has given to us and work ecumenically and stop this. I am a Methodist and I am Pentecostal, and we have a strategy for Pentecostal churches. We have a strategy for Methodist churches. Let's come together and do some ecumenical work together to strengthen those values that are important to us, because then we'll have even a depth of resource to do so.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, this is so enlightening. Thank you so much, Reverend. We are learning. For me, I would perhaps want to go back to Jesus Christ, that he was the embodiment of God, because in the book of Matthew chapter 9, Jesus transfigures and there's a glory that is seen. But that glory, he had to package it and embody it in the human nature, in the human form, a form that we would understand, that would not scare us, a form that was to our level. So he came down to our level. So this is a time that we as parents, as the first generation, we need to come back to the level that our children understand. The word communication that Reverend Christine told us, that is good, that we need to communicate a language that they understand. We have to come to their level. We have to win them. We can't afford to lose them. If they go to another church, thank God, because some of them are not going to any other church. They are taking up practices that we know that they are self-destructing. So Christ Jesus is the classic example. He came and he spoke in a language that was so simple. He carried a simple body, a simple nature. He did not judge anyone. I like that when they found that woman that was found with a man who's not her husband and they wanted to stone her, he was so calm about it. Let him who has no sin cast the first stone. So I think to bridge this gap, there's a time that we, the parents, as much as we are carrying the glory of God, the power of God, the wisdom of God, we need to come down to the level of our children. We need to sit down and listen to them. Do more listening than talking. That's what I think.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your contributions and your input. We are just going to take a quick break where we're going to play just a few adverts, just 1 minute, and then we'll be right back with everybody. And then we'll round off. Due to time. So let me just play our quick advert, and then we will be going. Lovely. Can you hear me? Are we back? Yeah, lovely stuff. Okay, 1 second, sorry. I'm just going to read out before we continue and round off a question from one of our viewers, which is, with our children marrying across culture and race, will it be possible to maintain a pure culture within the Zimbabwean culture? Feel free, anyone can answer this one. It's quite a, yeah, I'm glad I'm not answering this one. Let me just repeat it just in case. With our children across culture and race, will it be possible to maintain a pure culture within the Zimbabwean culture?
Kudzi, can I respond? My thinking is that I am always interested about this Zimbabwean culture or whatever culture. We always speak as if these things are homogeneous. They are not. Within the Zimbabwean culture, there are different cultures that make up the Zimbabwean culture. Is any of them pure? I don't know. So I think that for me, the most important thing is that we bring up a child who is grounded, that we bring up a child who is a God-loving person, a child who's respectful, a child who is a rounded human being. That, for me, is my plea. Whether she becomes, if by God's grace, she happens to end up being the better Zimbabwean than I am, I will thank God. If she becomes a better Nigerian than her father, I will thank God. if she becomes a better British than any other British person, I will thank God. I just want a child who's rounded, who's happy, who is the person that God created her to be. And that will be defined sometimes with her circumstances. And we will do the best we can to pass on to her what we know and what we value. And that's all we can do.
Maybe if I say something, I am from Zimbabwe. I married a Zimbabwean man. We go to the same church. We were going to the same church before we got married, and we are raising our children. And we are raising them in a way that we know. But to tell you the truth be told, we are going that direction. They are going that direction. They are beautiful souls. They have good characters. They are obedient. But what they think and how they are going, I look at them and I'm thinking, how is this possible? So I don't think it's a matter of cross marriage or anything. I think it's just the environment we are exposed to, and people will adapt to things that they find suitable, and they just live their life. So just do the best that you can as a parent. We are all trying to do the best that we can, and we leave the rest to God.
I think that's a great question. I think purity went out of the door the moment we left the nation. So even for those who might think, oh yeah, we are really doing this and we're doing that, the degree of purity has changed immediately when we left a geographical location into another geographical location. It just meant that there's certain things now that we probably now have to value and say, look, what do I need to, what are the sort of fundamentals that I now need to ensure my child has? So yeah, even whether it's cross marriage or not cross marriage, still will be the same. It will be the same thing. It's now down to whether or not we can, how much of it can we preserve. But actually, I would go as far as to say, before we even talk about any particular culture or any particular heritage, we need to be grounded in the foundations of Christ first. The culture of Christ has got to be the first one. And then every other subculture will be filtered through those lenses. Because the problem is, if we talk about purist Shona culture, sooner or later it's going to clash with Christian culture. Because there will be certain things in purist Shona culture that do not go hand in hand with Christendom. So we either decide, are we primarily Christian or are we primarily Zimbabwean? And I think that has to be in the right order, because one will shape the other.
I like that. I like that. Thank you so much. That was very enlightening, stimulating, educational, a whole lot. Fabulous. As you round off, Reverend Charity, in our segment last week, could you please just give your input on an issue that was raised regarding upholding a ministerial, like the ministerial experience of, and over, and God's anointing over theological training? That was mentioned in brief, but could you give us what your inputs on that and your take?
I was really hoping I wasn't to respond to that question, because I know that they are parts of God's church who do not believe that theological training is essential. And they believe that everything that we do should be primarily and only rooted in the Bible. And I don't agree. I think theological training is really important. And I think that I have young people in my congregation and in the communities that I exercise mission and ministry, who sometimes ask me really, really difficult questions. And why does bad things happen to good people? If God is such a loving father, why did my brother rape me? And I then struggle, and I come theology, then my understanding of who God is and how God works then helps me respond to those kinds of questions. And more, I think that we are living in a world where people are becoming a lot more aware. There are a lot more religions around, and people are choosing where they find meaning. And if we are not able to articulate our own faith and our own understanding of what we believe, albeit religions are created by human beings, if we are not able to understand and articulate that, we are not sold anymore. So I struggle when some people don't believe that theology is important, and yet they are theologizing all the time. Maybe it's what they think theology is that I don't understand, but I think whenever I'm speaking to them, we are talking about God and what God does and how we understand God. And to me, we are already into theology as soon as we start going into that area. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. I believe we have come to the end of our show. So I'm just going to ask you to please just give us your concluding remarks on the whole topic. If there's anything that you would like to share, just for less than 2 minutes, if that's okay, where you're just going to leave the audience and our viewers with something. Thank you once again for being part of my panel. So please, we'll start with Auntie Mimi.
Thank you very much. I want to say thank you, Kudzi. Keep this up. Thank you so much for opening this dialogue and this platform. Well done. We are rooting for you. My conclusion to this topic would be it's time for us to invest in the younger generation, the second generation. Knowledge is power. We can do courses. We can apply those courses. Let us go out and invest into them, find ways to engage them, to connect with them so that they can also continue with our heritage. I know some people think that we have to let go, but I think we can continue this journey. Fellowshipping is for families. When you fellowship together with your family, there is beauty in it, there is satisfaction in it. So let us invest, go to courses, learn. Hosea 4 or 6 says, my people are perishing because of lack of knowledge. Let us get that knowledge. Thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Reverend Charity? I think you're still on mute, Reverend. Sorry.
My apologies. Thank you very much for the privilege to be part of your panel. But I really was encouraged last week when I came back, when I came here, to realize that actually there are young people there who are using technology for something fruitful, and especially for this conversation. But there's something I wanted to share with you. As I was thinking about this, I came across some stats that really struck me. In 1900, Africa had a population of 133 million people, and only 9 million of these were Christians. That's about 6%. And if you fast forward to 2015, no less than 525 million Christians out of 1.1 billion people were African Christians, over 30% of the African population therefore becomes Christian. And these are Christians in Africa and in the diaspora. And I think that if we do not do the right things and embrace our young people, we will miss the opportunity to influence the diasporian Christianity, which therefore misses the opportunity to influence world Christianity. We need to do everything that we can to embrace young people, to have them in real leadership positions, to encourage them to only ever seek to be who they are, come as they are, and offer themselves as they are. Give them the safe space to navigate and find out their own identity and help them to become the people they're called to be by God. Context, 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 always. And thank you for the opportunity.
It's been a pleasure. Of course, I'm gonna remember that context. Hey, I'll make sure I get down to my books and research, madam. And last but not least, Pastor Meshach.
I echo the same sentiment as Auntie Mimi and also Rev Charity. Thank you again for the invitation. I think you're doing a great thing. It's a great conversation. And I don't think anyone else would be able to do it. It has to be someone in the second generation willing to open up the dialogue. And I guess now there's some in the first generation who now have to engage with this dialogue and see where things go from there. I think some of my last remarks, maybe just touching a bit on the question of theological training. My only question would be, and I'll answer it with a question, would you go under the knife with a doctor who is supposedly just figuring their way out at that moment? And would you lay down and let them operate on you? Or would you look for one who is qualified and trained and understands how your body works and what needs to be done? In the same manner, why should the most valuable thing that we have, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ, be distributed or be taught by people who have not taken the time to be trained and be equipped in understanding how to give it across? If we can't do that with teachers, if we can't do that with doctors, if we can't do that with lawyers, why should we do that with the church? Why should we do that with the church? So we have got to so I think, if I can be brutally honest, I know there's sometimes when you hide behind the Holy Spirit and you say, oh no, the Holy Spirit is no, that it's not even about that. It's I think it's sheer laziness when it comes to committing to training and being able to do things the way that they should be done properly. And this is why we have some of these issues in Africa, where you've got all kinds of churches mushrooming everywhere and people being abused as a result of it, because there is theological illiteracy. Whereas when people commit to training and they are in that position where they can really do the gospel justice, people will actually find Christ in the process. So I think that would be my take on that. And just his concluding thoughts on the cultural imbalance. I think there has to be a dialogue, mutual dialogue between first generation and second generation, and together find ways of bringing up what will be a hybrid model that will fit both the first and the second generation. So once again, I'm so grateful to have been afforded this opportunity. Take care.
Thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I have just been absorbing like a sponge. I have been enlightened. I'm learning more. And thank you so much for availing yourselves. We have had Auntie Mimi from Forward in Faith, Reverend Charity representing Methodist, and Pastor Meshach from Assemblies of God. And I have been Kudzi. Thank you so much for for joining. Thank you so much to the viewers. Thank you so much for sharing, those that have liked. May God richly bless you. And this has come to the end of our conversation. Make sure you do share this with a friend, and look out for the next conversation. May God bless you and have a blessed night. Bye-bye, everyone.